Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Prepared Environment and the Prepared Adult for Children on the Spectrum. I'm Amy Williams with Amy Williams Academy. So settle in, get your notes page, get your favorite beverage, some snacks close by, and let's get started. So let's start with what you probably have done so many times before, but the experience, put a finger down. So hold 5 fingers up and put 1 finger down if you have ever had children in your classroom that you weren't sure exactly what kind of adaptations to make to help this child put forward their strengths and lessen their struggles. Put a finger down if you have ever felt like, I have so many children in my classroom who need so many different things, so many adaptations, I'm not sure where to begin. Put a finger down where if you have ever reached out to someone who has experience, has ideas, and a fresh perspective to help you figure out how to be the best person you could be for all the children in your classroom. Put a finger down if you've ever gone home after the end of the day with so many needs and so many children with so many differences and strengths and struggles, and you're just completely exhausted. And lastly, put a finger down if you've ever felt like, I'm frozen, I'm stuck, I'm not sure what to do. How do I take care of myself so that I could come back tomorrow morning fresh with a new perspective and some new ideas to help the children in my classroom? I bet you've got a lot of fingers down. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll dive into some vocabulary, some information, some ideas, and some time to take a look at how you are supporting yourself as you support the children in your classroom. Well, let's start with, what is autism anyway? This is the focus of this particular webinar. So I'd like us to take a look at what does it look like, and what is it, and what is the language surrounding it, right? Okay, so simply put, and I want to say before we go deeper, this is a super short webinar. There's so much information out there. More and more is coming to us as educators from people in the community, from families and research, and other people who are living in this world in a deeper way than we are, perhaps, right? So know that today we're just going to only touch on a few things. There's more to learn out there. So if you want more information, more resources, reach out to me after you view this, and I can absolutely point you in a direction that I have found to be really helpful and useful as I grow as an educator and a person who supports educators in supporting children and families, right? So let's talk about it now. Autism, simply put, is a lifelong developmental disability that affects the way a person communicates and relates to people around them, right? That's pretty simple. And autism is not simple. It's often referred to as a spectrum. So you'll have children and people that you work with, maybe yourself, who have strengths and struggles in different areas. So let's talk about them a little bit, right? So first of all, children with autism have difficulty relating to others in a meaningful way. And I mean meaningful on both sides of the communication arc. All right. So children are learning how to make friends, are learning how to ask for what they need, learning how to get their needs met, in sometimes in ways that are difficult for others who may not think in the same way, or who may not see a situation in the same way. So that's where we can come in to help to prepare ourselves and prepare our environments so that all children can be successful and learn and grow with each other in a community, right? Their ability to develop friendships is generally limited. It's a struggle, right? And the capacity to understand another person's emotional expression. What does it mean when their face is like this? What does it mean when they turn and walk away? I'm still learning what that means. I'm still learning. Their words say this, their tone sounds like this, and their body looks like that. What does that mean, right? So again, another place for us to step in. Okay, so let's talk about neurodiversity. Is it a disability, right? So check this out. While everyone with a brain-based disability is considered neurodivergent, not everyone who is neurodivergent is considered disabled, right? The neurodiversity movement is a celebration of the vast differences in people's thought processes, their behavior, and it also advocates for acknowledging and accommodating those differences. Now, I'd like to put a spotlight on this particular author. I recommend these books for further learning and further understanding of people who are on the autism spectrum, autistic people, people who are autistic, and we're going to talk about that kind of language in just a minute. But this is John Elder Robison. So his book, Raising Cubby, and then another one, Look Me in the Eye, are really insightful. So I recommend you taking a look at those, okay? But in his books and in his, when he speaks and as he talks, here's one little bit that he shared that just kind of, made me think. So here we go. He says, neurodiversity and being neurodivergent are identities, not medical labels. So we can check out our perspective and think, am I teaching, am I supporting a label and what, oh, this is what I've heard autism looks like, this is what you do. Is that the case, right? How I show up to support families and children, it's important to remember that I show up for the individual. I notice what is the struggle and how can I teach into that. You know, the idea Ross Green talks about, the lagging skills and unmet needs. Okay, let's talk about what are the lagging skills and how can you teach into them. He also goes on to say, living as a neurodivergent person is more than living with a disability. There is exceptionality and community. He also goes on to say neurodiversity is to many of us what Black, Jewish, or Latin are to people who embrace those identities. Okay, now here is a big graphic with lots of information on it, and it's from Autism Sketches. So I want to absolutely give credit where credit is due. There's a lot of info on here. So if you need to pause and take a look at it, feel free to do that. As I recommend throughout this, as you're viewing this webinar, pause at any moment to consider, to think, to put in your mind what you already know and what we're talking about now, right? Okay, so here we go. Autism spectrum. So take a look at this. Autism spectrum is not linear, where we might say someone who is less autistic or someone who is very autistic. What does that mean anyway, right? It's not linear. Some people have described it as an arc, right? And here's another way to look at it, as a round pie chart, if you will. So it looks more like this. So you see the different colors and the different triangles, and each of those colors might represent different areas of skill or areas of skill growth that you see, right? So perhaps one section, the child or the person has more social skills, has greater success, and has done some skill building in that particular area. And then there might be another area where it might be fixations, places where a person might really get focused on one particular thing or one particular idea and stay on that for a longer amount of time than you might expect, right? So you may have a lot of that or less of that. Then there are routines, right? What are the routines that are important to this child? Is there more of a connection and a holding on to routines, really looking forward to this happens, then this happens, then this happens, right? Next, we could take a look at sensory issues, right? Is there a sensitivity, and in what areas, what sensory areas are there sensitivities, and in what areas are there sensory seeking behaviors, right? So the sensory issues, is it more of a struggle, less of a struggle? Then we might take a look at stimming, those repetitive movements that children use to assist in their regulation, right? Is there more of that, less of that? What about perception? Are they perceiving what is happening in a way that is what the other person intends, or is there more of a struggle there? Then there's a section of executive function and other. Isn't there always an other? Yeah. So terms like, oh, this child is high functioning or this child is low functioning are really harmful, and don't use those anymore. So if you find that those are in your vocabulary or you have been using them, it's okay, but now is the time to eliminate that from your vocabulary. What is high functioning anyway, and what is low functioning, right? So all of this to consider as we move forward in this webinar, right? So now's the time to pause and to write. So take a moment, find your pause button, and in just a second, hit pause. And I invite you to do some writing and put some thoughts down of what you think about what we've just spoken about, right? About the community, about the spectrum, the pie chart, high functioning, low functioning. What do you think about that? What are your initial thoughts? What do you know about autism already? And what are your thoughts at this point in time? All right, so find pause, hit pause, and then when you're ready, hit go again, and I'll be right here. Okay, so now it's time to start really taking a look at the language that we use around autism, right? So we're going to do some vocabulary building right here, right now. So what's neurotypical? We've heard ourselves use that language. We've heard other people use it. We've heard it on podcasts, and we've read it in books and articles and research papers, right? So what does that mean? Well, neurotypical describes an individual who thinks, who perceives, and who behaves in ways that are considered the norm by the general population. Whatever the norm is. What are the cultural expectations? What are the classroom expectations? What is the age expectation, right? What would you define as neurotypical is what you might expect to see, right? So, and what we might expect to see as what the general population would expect, right? Does it make it right? Does it make it wrong? Sometimes it is mistaken because, what is normal? Okay, next, let's talk about neurodivergent. What is neurodivergent? Neurodivergent describes someone who isn't neurotypical. So it could be a child who is on this autism spectrum, a child with ADHD, and other different kind of struggles that show up in their classroom experience, in their relationships with others, right? And then there's the word neurodiversity. Now, where I have learned, and I have learned recently, is sometimes I exchange neurodiverse and neurodivergent and neurodiversity, and I exchange them in ways that aren't as clear as I could be. So here you go. Here's what it is. So neurodiversity is the idea that there are many ways to think and learn and behave. Right? So you might have a neurodiverse classroom, right? Or a neurodiverse community, and that's neurodiversity. Let us remember that these differences can be embraced and celebrated. Are there places where we can assist and teach skills, practice skills, role model skills? So there's more, the child experiences greater success, right? Yeah. So, well, and there are also those differences that can really be superpowers and can be embraced and celebrated. Absolutely, in a classroom that is neurodiverse, you can have children who can learn from each other. This is how my brain works. This is how your brain works. This is how we work together with our brains working differently. Right on. All right, so deep breath. Now we're going to talk about how do we use language to describe the individual? Okay, so there are a couple different ways. So one, professionals who work in the community, in the autism community, were more likely to support and use person-first language, right? We've heard a lot about the importance, use person first because they're a person first, okay? Being mindful of the power of that label and the bias that unfortunately comes along with it is something that is true. So we might use person first language to say a person with autism, So we don't get hung up on our bias that comes along with the word or the phrase autism, right? It's important to be honest and to notice when we hear a person with autism or we hear autistic person, what do we have in our mind that comes to the front? What are our biases that might be hidden, maybe not so hidden, right? So here's another way to look at it. Overwhelmingly, autistic adults prefer identity first language terms to refer to themselves and to others with autism, right? There's a belief that autism is a part of their identity, nothing to be ashamed of. Person first can sound awkward and kind of weird, and it draws attention to the disability rather than saying straight up an autistic person, right? So there are differences of opinion of, do you say autistic child or do you say child with autism? Let's remember that language is dynamic, right? So the need for open communication around autism professionals about how we're going to communicate with and about autistic individuals and their families is important. So how about let's ask? If we're not sure, or we're entering into a conversation with a specialist or with a family member or with children themselves, you can ask, which do you prefer? That's such a respectful thing to do, to find out what is your preference and then use that preference. So let's take another time to pause and write. So find your pause button and press pause. And I invite you to write a little bit about your thoughts about person first language or the other perspective we talked about. Do you say child with autism or do you say autistic child? What is it that you do now? And what are your thoughts about maybe saying it in a different way? Consider what might be an obstacle to finding out what is the family's preference. How do they want to be talked about, right? So what might you say when you ask a family member or you ask a child, or you consider what language do I use, right? That's most respectful and is that person's preferred language, right? So hit the pause button and come on back when you're ready. I'll be right here. Okay, we're back. I'd like to share a little bit with you. It's the trailer for a documentary called The Reason I Jump. The documentary was inspired by this book right here, right? Naoki Higashida. I recommend I want every teacher to have this in their classroom. Have this in your library. It's super short. It's such an insightful read. And the way that it's put together is there are, it goes from questions from 1 to, let's see, what's the last one, like 50 some or something. Anyway, there are common questions that Naoki heard over and over again. Now, this child, not a child anymore, but he was born in 1992 and was diagnosed with autism at the age of 5, right? So he graduated from high school in 2011. So he's grown up now in Japan. So here's a picture of him. Yep. And you'll see he's got, it's like a piece of cardboard that he and his parent made. This child did not have words, didn't speak. So how could he communicate? So they figured out a way to create a communication board. So he dictated this book to his person, and then it became a book. And in it, he describes or he answers common questions that he hears over and over again, like, why don't you make eye contact when you're talking? Or what if you're on one of your highs? What's going through your mind? What's the reason you jump? And then he goes about answering them. Super insightful book. So let's take a moment and we'll take a look at the trailer to the documentary. I believe it's on Netflix. I hope it's still there. So check this out.
Can you imagine how your life would be if you couldn't say
Well, hold on, let's fix this.
what you wanted?
Now Higashida makes a map of his mind. It's kind of poetry.
How do I see the world? For me, the details jump straight out. Inside my head, there isn't really such a big difference between what I was told just now and what I heard a long time ago. My mind is forever swaying, swaying and then.
Try to stop her from being herself.
I think we can change the conversation around autism by being part of the conversation.
Right now, Joss is having a joy that I will never come close to.
To live my life as a human being, nothing is more important than being able to express myself.
All right. What did you think? Maybe it's something that you've already seen before, right? I wonder. I'd be curious to hear. Okay, so let's pick a number between 1 and 58 and hear what Naoki has to say. So I'm just gonna flip in the book. If we were in person, I'd have somebody pick a number. But let's see. I'll just, where am I? Okay. What do you think about running races? And his answer is, I don't hate races, but the instant I'm conscious of the need to run fast, I find that I can't. If I'm just running for fun with my friends, I find that I can run as long as I want to. It's as if I'm making friends with the wind. Sometimes people say that I'm very good at running away, but really it's just that when someone's chasing me, I find it both funny and frightening when the chaser is catching up to me. This prompts me to put on a spurt of speed and I'm off. The reason I can't run well once I'm aware of needing to isn't to do with nerves. My problem is that as soon as I try to run fast, I start thinking about how I ought to be moving my arms and legs, and then my whole body freezes up. And another reason I don't do well in races is that I don't really get any pleasure out of beating other people. I agree that it's right and proper to do the best you can in the race, but this desire to beat everyone else is just another matter altogether. So, on competitive occasions like school sports days, the pleasure I get just by being there takes over, and I'll end up running the race with all the urgency of someone skipping his way across a meadow. Okay, let's find another one. So let's see. Let's answer the question, or listen to his answer to why do you jump? What is the reason you jump? And he answers, what do you think I'm feeling when I'm jumping up and down and clapping my hands? I bet you think I'm not really feeling anything much beyond the manic glee all over my face. Now remember, when he wrote this, he was he was 12 years old. Wow. Okay, carries on. But when I'm jumping, it's as if my feelings are going upward to the sky. Really, my urge to be swallowed up by the sky is enough to make my heart quiver. When I'm jumping, I could feel my body parts really well too, my bounding legs and my clapping hands, and that makes me feel so, so good. So that's one reason I jump, and recently I've noticed another reason. People with autism react physically to feelings of happiness and sadness. So when something happens that affects me emotionally, my body seizes up as if struck by lightning. Seizing up doesn't mean that my muscles literally get stiff and immobile. Rather, it means that I'm not free to move the way that I want. So by jumping up and down, it's as if I'm shaking loose the ropes that are tying up my body. When I jump, I feel lighter, and I think the reason my body is drawn skyward is that the motion makes me want to change into a bird and fly off to some faraway place. But constrained both by ourselves and by the people around us, all we can do is tweet, tweet, flap our wings, and hop around in a cage. Ah, if only I could just flap my wings and soar away into the big blue yonder, over the hills and far away. Quite poetic, right? Yeah. It sounds like it's an attempt to regulate. When a big emotion happens and the body begins to move, is that an attempt, a try to regulate the emotions or to feel fully that emotion, right? It's questions to begin to ask and to wonder as we tap into what is the inner perspective of the child that I'm working with? What is going on in their mind, right? It's more difficult when they're not verbal. So we have to figure out ways to create a way to communicate. So is it a communication board? Is it an adaptive communication device, right? So depending on the child and depending on what the recommendations are of someone who is an expert or a specialist working with them, you may have something to use in your classroom that helps with this communication and helps bridge the communication if words are not at the forefront for this particular child. Okay, now let's take a pause and stretch. If you haven't stretched in a little bit, please do so. I'm gonna do it too. And we'll carry on. All right, so we've got some foundation, and remember, this is really just the tip of the information that is out there and that's available, right? So know that, and know that there's much more to learn, much more for me to learn, much more for you to learn, right? So as we shift from some foundation, let's take a look at, okay, what can I do? What's happening in the classroom? How can I best support the child? How can I prepare myself? How can I prepare the environment for the child and all the children? An amazing, great question. First question is, what is the obstacle? What's the obstacle and what's the goal, right? What are you hoping to provide and what's preventing that from happening, right? What's the obstacle? What's the goal? Sometimes I like to use the acronym VOTE, V-O-T-E. V is, what is the victory? What is it that you want? That's the goal, right? O is the obstacle. What's keeping you from getting what you want? And then V-O-T is tools, techniques. What is it that you need to overcome the obstacle to get at what you want, to get at the V? And then the E part of VOTE is all the emotions around it. So victory, obstacle, tools and techniques, followed by emotion. When you can pause and take a look at, okay, what's happening in the classroom? What's the goal? What is the goal that I have in mind? What is the goal the child has in mind? And what's the obstacle from getting to that goal? Then what do you need? What tools, techniques do you need? And how do you feel about it all? How do they feel about it all? It could be that the obstacle is language, right? So typically you'll notice that language skills dip during a meltdown, right? When that happens, know that it takes a lot of effort to process what it is that another person is saying. It takes a lot to comprehend what a person is saying and what they mean, right? Because we've got, okay, I have to hear the words that they're saying. I have to notice the micro expressions on their face. I have to notice and understand what they're doing with their body. Oh yeah, their tone and all of that. All that comes together to clearly communicate what I want to say and what I want you to hear and what I want you to understand, right? So there may be a dip, especially during a meltdown. So when a child is so dysregulated, there's a sensory input that is overwhelming and the child goes into meltdown. Meltdown is different from tantrum, right? So when Words are not going to work. I am not operating from any of my frontal lobe connections that I've made in my few years on the planet. I'm going straight to my amygdala. What is happening? So it's more difficult to process language and to understand what someone's trying to communicate, right? So with knowing that, we can stop talking. And gosh, how hard is that? we are trained to, we're teaching vocabulary where there's always a moment to insert and help children understand through words, right? During a meltdown, just know full permission to stop talking mid-sentence if necessary, right? Those of us who tend to talk and talk and talk, and that's kind of our main way that we get in our own way in general, that this one's going to be hard to stop talking, right? So during a meltdown, the less talking we do, the better, right? If there is a safety something or other, we want to be true and brief, using as few words as possible if the situation warrants it, helping other students understand this is a meltdown that's happening. We could talk more about that later, but right now, please go there, using as few words as possible, right? So there are 2 words to remember and 2 words to say during a meltdown, and that's absolutely nothing, right? You can be near to let them know that they are safe. You can use your body to keep them safe and keep others safe during a meltdown, and be mindful and be thinking about, okay, what caused this meltdown? So maybe you can address that later, and be present with the meltdown itself. We've all got our observant eyes, and our skills of observation are pretty finely tuned, right? And they become more and more finely tuned with more experience, yeah? So imagine during those times of a meltdown, we really turn up the volume on our observation skills. What do we notice? What do we see, right? Okay, we're going to take a little bit of a pause. I encourage you to make this face right now. Yep, make that face. And just relax the muscles in your face and in your neck. Use your hands to give yourself a little rub if you need to. Stand up and stretch if you need to. Okay. Now we're back to it. So the last thing to happen is not necessarily the reason for the meltdown. Okay, so we're in a meltdown is happening right in front of us, right? And we're trying to figure out, we've turned on our observant eye, we've cranked up the volume on that, and we're trying to notice what is happening right now, right? Remember that the last thing to happen is not necessarily the reason for the meltdown, right? It could be something that builds up over a course of an hour or a morning, right? That leads to the meltdown. That's when we get to become really curious and consider what happened earlier in the day that might be the reason for the meltdown. Okay. Now check this out. Oftentimes, and when we think of, okay, what has happened earlier in the day or an hour before or so, was there a buildup of demands, right? Oftentimes, the buildup of demands can lead to those big meltdowns, right? What we consider to be a small demand might be something that's much bigger, a bigger ask for a child who is autistic, right? So if you imagine, okay, my brain has too many tabs open, right? And imagine all of those tabs are open and there's video playing on all of them and sound all at the same time. Imagine that. So when we can consider, I'm not going to focus on one activator. This child took the red ball from this child and there's a meltdown. What was happening before? What was the buildup to someone taking my ball being the last thing to happen before the meltdown? Was that necessarily the activator? Okay. Another something to remember as the adult, as we prepare ourselves, right, is to consider, okay, the child is not giving me a hard time. What is that child's perspective? They are having a hard time. They're in discomfort. There's a struggle. Doesn't feel good necessarily. So when we can realize that they're not trying to do that to us, right? They're not giving you a hard time. They're the ones that are having the hard time. And what a honored position it is for us to be that person, to show up, to keep them safe, to help prepare and shift the environment so that they can feel safer and more comfortable, and release and finish the meltdown and practice their skills at regulating again, right? And this is from School Run Mom Autism, someone that I follow on Instagram. I recommend that too. And this person says, your child's meltdown is never a choice, right? So we haven't talked much in this webinar about the difference between tantrum and meltdown, but tantrum has more choice in it. There's more frontal lobe connection during a tantrum. The tantrum will stop as soon as they get what it is that they're tantruming about, right? They're throwing a tantrum because there's no more cheese. Oh, but when you find cheese, they regulate pretty quickly, right? In a meltdown, that's not the case. Maybe there's no more cheese, the child falls apart into what is a meltdown because, oh, we found more cheese and we have cheese. Their meltdowns continue. So that gives us a clue that it's a meltdown and not a tantrum, right? Now let's take another pause and write down your thoughts over the last little bits that we've just shared. So I'll be quiet a moment. You just go ahead and push pause, write in your notes page and your workbook. And when you're ready to come back, come on back. Okay, now we're back. Let's talk a little about communication techniques, what you can do to promote communication and the growth of successful communication. Okay, so it may be that you can make visual supports as an aid for communication. Those are great ways to begin bridging what you want, what I want, what you want to say, what I want to say, what you want to communicate, what I want to communicate. Visual supports can be really helpful. And here's one example, right? You can make these on your own. You could certainly go to Google Images and find images. You can take photographs yourself. I know really young children love to see real faces. And if, you can draw stick figures, okay. But man, the real picture of a real person carries so much power, right? So I would recommend real pictures of real children. And I'm thinking of a child right now who was having a real struggle with asking a friend to play. Right. So we created a book for her, starring her in practicing. What do you do when you ask a friend to play? Here's what it looks like. Here's what and they say yes. So hooray, you ask them to play. They say, okay, you go and play. What happens if they say no? What do you do? How might you feel? Can you go find a teacher? Can you take some deep breaths, right? What are the things that you could do? So I'm thinking of this book for this particular child, went through all the possible variables that could happen when you're asking a friend to play. They say yes, they say no, they say yes, then they change their mind. How do you know when the play is finished? How do you know when they don't want to keep playing like that? What does their face look like? What does their body look like? So you can use these kinds of supports to aid for communication. So like in the slide that you see here, this one looks like, getting ready to go to school. So first thing to do, brush your teeth. It looks like this. Next thing is brush your hair. It looks like this. Next thing might be we read a book and then we get dressed, right? Now, there's probably more pieces to this. Here's what happens in the morning. You can make, here's what happens at lunchtime. Here's what happens when you go to the bathroom. Here's what happens at dismissal time. right? So you can offer those cues as offer those visual supports to help children grow in their independence and grow in knowing what to expect. Okay. Clear and consistent routines are another important piece to remember in preparing your environment for children to be successful, right? So what is the routine? Is it clear? Is it consistent? So you'll see here the visual: wake up, get dressed, breakfast, followed by brush teeth, go for a walk, playtime, followed by put toys away, craft time, have a snack, right? So you can make your own cards like this or differently, right? I appreciate that this person has it on a string with clothespins, because you can change them out as the day progresses, right? So think about, do you have a specialist who's working with the child already who can make these for you? Or I think every teacher has a laminator, right? So can you create these on cardstock yourself, right? I'm thinking of another child, an autistic child who had a whiteboard that we got from the Dollar Tree. And it was really helpful for this child to know what's first, what's next, and what follows, right? So he can make choices. This is what's going to happen first. This is what work I'll choose first. When I'm finished with that, what's the next thing I'm going to choose? And then what's the next thing I'm going to choose? So that whiteboard was something that was really useful for this child, right? So there was an adult who would help him ask the questions of, what would you like to do? What looks interesting to you? Okay, let's put that on our board. And then what do you think you'd like to do? Would you like to paint, or would you like to draw? Would you like to have a snack, or would you like to take a rest? Would you like to read a book? You see what I'm saying? So the adult would cue with some ideas if the child didn't have ideas right away, right? And with the dry erase board, you could just erase it and then draw the next few things, right? Okay, here's another invitation to kind of pause your brain, shake it out a little bit, and I invite you to try this. This is something that you could do that works your brain in just a little bit of a different way before we continue on with our material today. So deep breath, put your hands, put everything down, and I'd like for you to, with one hand, make a square. You got that? Great. Next hand, do a triangle. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Now do them both at the same time. Ready? Go. Let me try it again. I think it changed directions. Okay, bonus extra credit if you can reverse it, right? Feel free if you want to pause and keep trying that again. It's something that's really fun that you can do with your family too. Okay, so that's one way that you can pause, activate a different part of your brain, connect the right and the left sides of your brains together. Your singular brain. That's silly. Okay, so now we've had that little break. I'm gonna have a little bit of water. Okay, we're gonna shift gears a little bit. So what in your program is already great, right? What makes your program so great for children on the spectrum? What does it look like? Are there places where they can learn and grow? Are there places where they see role modeling of different social situations? Are there places where they can communicate in a way that's as clear as possible, right? So let's take a look at your environment. What do you have already, and what adjustments can you make? Okay, so in your environment, consider, what are the daily routines? What can children expect to happen first part of the day? What usually follows that? What usually follows that, right? So you probably have in your classroom a schedule or the routines of the day, right? most of the time that's for if a substitute comes in, they kind of know what the rhythm of the day is, right? Is there something around that might show children what they can expect? What is the daily routine? What can they predict? What can they depend upon, right? So the way that your classroom day is organized can be really useful, right? Daily routines, the predictability. Next, what are all the hands-on experiences that are offered, right? Is there a place, and if you take a look at the materials and the work that you have on a shelf, how many of them invite hands-on experiences? Probably most of them, right? Because we believe that children learn through their hands or through body connection to what it is that the material calls for, right? What's the hand-on experience? What are the hand-on experiences that you have in your classroom, right? Next, multisensory. Are there materials where a child can experience visual input? Are there places to have auditory input, olfactory input, kinesthetic, proprioceptive, vestibular, all of the senses? If you paused and just took a look at your classroom, you could say, yes, 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 yes. Okay, now those are the multisensory piece has kind of two sides of it, right? Is there a place for a child to receive and engage in sensory seeking satisfaction? On the other side, is there a place for children who may be more sensory sensitive to still interact with the classroom, and maybe they have auditory sensitivity? So sometimes a normal hum of a classroom might be really loud, right? So are there noise canceling headphones, or is there a place in the room that's more quiet? Or see what you can do to offer spaces for sensory seeking and sensory sensitive experiences, right? Next, there's probably an opportunity for continuous engagement, right? So when a child is finished with the colored water on the playground, is there something that will draw their attention next? What is their interest? What are they interested in that continuously engages them at their own pace? Now let's take a look at your routines and the idea of social stories, right? So we all give all children, endless opportunities to practice polite social interactions, right? And those routines of how to ask a friend to play, how to greet someone when you see them, how to say goodbye, how to have snack at the same table. So all of those polite social interactions are woven into what we create in the classroom, right? So there is an art to turn taking in conversations. And children who are on the spectrum might have more difficulty with this. So here is where you can bring the tool of social stories in to teach. Here is how you take turns. Here is how you ask a friend to play. Here is how you wait for a turn. Here is how you stand in line. All of the things, how to do things, are you can create a social story around, right? In Montessori circles, they call those grace and courtesies, how to do things, right? How to stand near to somebody, how near is too near, how far is too far, right? What about eye contact, right? That could be really difficult. So maybe instead of looking at my eyes, you can look at my eyebrow or my forehead, or you can look at my chin, right? So they can, with their whatever their comfort level is, they could still be going toward more success. I'm not going to look at your eyes, but I will look at your chin, or I will look at your earring, right? Okay. So speaking of social stories, let's take some time to actually write one. So I'm going to give you the ingredients of how to write a social story in just a minute. But get your pen and your paper if you don't have it already, and bring it close to you, because we're going to practice writing one. Now, social story is a plan, is a technique that was developed by Carol Gray, right? I wish I developed it, but I didn't. It was Carol Gray. And since she taught this to other people, so many educators know about the power of a social story, right? How to do things, what to expect in social situations in a way that's clear, predictable, and true. So Carol Gray says, here's some things to remember when writing a social story. Number one, first or third person perspective is best, all right? Next, past, present, and or future tense, right? What happens now, what happens later, what has happened in the past, right? You can choose and add those together, right? So consider your tense that you're going to select, right? Next, number three is positive and a patient tone, right? Short, to the point, clear, and upbeat, positive, and patient. Knowing that, as with any good story, there might be a little conflict. I'm asking your friend to play. They say yes, all is well. I'm asking your friend to play. They say no, I feel disappointed. There's some conflict, right? So remember, in your social story, when there's conflict, what's the positive and patient tone that you can add in so that the child reading it has the understanding of, okay, if they say no, it's okay. Maybe tomorrow, maybe later, right? Next, literal accuracy, right? So as you're developing and writing social stories, keep it as literal and accurate as possible. Write about what happens, what can happen, and what probably will happen, right? And then the accurate meaning. Use the words that accurately describe what is happening. Use anatomically correct words, use phrases and language that other children might use, right? And remember all this also. Number one is use descriptive and coaching. Use descriptive phrases, sentences, and coaching phrases and sentences at a ratio of 2 to 1. So describe twice, coach once. This might happen, or this happens, and this happens. Here's what to do. Then describe again. Then this can happen. This happens. Here's what to do. So 2 to 1. Next, number 2, answer the questions: where, when, who, what, how, and why. Okay, next, you want to describe more than direct. And that kind of takes us up to the descriptive sentences and coaching sentences, 2 to 1. You want to describe more than you direct in your social story, right? And then number 4 in this list is use pictures, right? Let the child be the star of the story, if you wish, or pictures of real children doing real things, right? Faces that show full expression of a wide variety of emotions that they might experience, right? And then the last one here to remember is to practice, provide feedback, right? We've described, we've coached, let's practice, let's have a turn, right? I have several books. I call the books that I write Socimo books because they're more social, emotional in nature, but they're greatly inspired by Carol Gray's work, right? So there's pictures, of course, there's describing, then there's coaching, and there's prompts to pause and practice. There are prompts to pause and think, well, what could I do? I could do this or this or this. Oh, what would you do? So there's a conversation between the person reading the book alongside the child, and there's an opportunity to share, what did you do? And then let's try this, pause, let's practice, right? And then you can give some feedback. I noticed you were looking in my direction. I noticed you put your hands down along your side. Oh, I noticed that you reached out to invite me to play. Whatever it is that you see or that you're describing or directing or coaching, when you practice it, provide feedback like, yes, That's it. That's how you do it. Okay, so now is probably going to be a longer pause for you, and I invite you to give it a go. So think about in your classroom, is there a behavior that you would like to write a social story about, right? Is it how far away to stand from your friend in the line? Is it how to ask a friend to play? Is it how to get ready for lunch? Is it how to pack away from lunch or the whole lunch process, right? Is it a story of when you come into the classroom, this is what happens, the beginning of the day or the end of the day or playground, right? So pause a moment and think about, okay, that time of day that's the most difficult. And I want you to write a social story about it, right? So pause, remember all of these reminders, first or third person perspective, past, present, and or future tense, positive, patient tone, literal accuracy, accurate meaning, right? You have all of these in your workbook that comes along with this. Know that you can take as long as you need to. Also, I recommend going back at least 3 or 4 times, 5, like a handful of times, and edit, revise, 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 right? Simple, accurate, literal accuracy, accurate meaning. Can I be more positive? Are my tenses in agreement, right? How are my descriptive sentences and coaching sentences? Are they at 2 to 1? Do I need to edit, right? Do I answer all of these questions? Who, what, when, where, hi, wow, ha, who, what, when, where, why, how, all of those, yeah, so take the time that you need and come back when you're ready. All right, now we're back. Wait, okay, congratulations, because you've just written a social story. If you'd like to send them to me, I'd be so curious and happy to give feedback if you wish. My email and contact information is at the end of this webinar, so you'll be able to see that. So feel free, if you are enjoying this webinar and you want to get some feedback, or I love writing social stories, one of my favorite things to do. So reach out, I'll be happy to help you, okay? All right, so moving forward, let's talk about routines and grace and courtesy. You heard me talk about that. It's a term, a phrase from the Montessori tradition, and it relates to any kind of philosophy that you might have in your classroom, right? The how to do things. Here's what happens, here's how to do the things that happen, right? Okay, so routines and grace and courtesy. How many opportunities do you give children to practice those interactions, those social interactions? The art of taking turn in conversations, how near to stand, how to maintain appropriate eye contact, right? Now, we mentioned this before, but right now we're coming back to it to say, is this a place where I want to write another social story about? You can write it in the book with pictures. I mean, Canva is your friend here, right? And you can create it there and make it really beautiful and inviting. And can you tell the story? Can you tell it and practice taking turns in small groups or even in larger groups, depending on your classroom, right? It might be that smaller groups for children who are on the spectrum might be more comfortable. So you know your community and you know your children and the struggles and the strengths of them. Small group, larger group. Oral tradition, book. Okay. So the importance of this is that you probably know this, but these skills are super important, right? And they're more easily learned when they're learned at an early stage in a child's development, earlier on in their education, before habits that are not helpful and aren't useful begin to take hold, right? Okay, next, let's talk about practical life. The things that happen in a classroom that are real, right? Watering plants, that's real. Washing the leaves of a plant, that's real. Slicing bananas for yourself for snack, that's real, right? Washing a window, that's real. So all of these experiences that we offer children give them, it help them to fine hone those visual motor skills necessary for doing all sorts of things: carrying, lifting, folding, rolling, a gentle touch, a firmer touch, right? So think about all the experiences that you offer. What are they fine honing? What visual motor skills are they fine honing? How about that? All right. Is there opportunity for them to carry and lift, to ask a friend to help them carry this table or this map or this heavy basket, right? So it helps them refine their movement, develop muscular strength, and there's a moment of social interaction in doing something together with the same purpose of moving this table from here to here. Moments of social connection that can be successful. All these practical life activities also have a great advantage of developing a child's awareness of where is their body in space, right? How close am I? How far away? Where do I end and you begin? That kind of thing. Okay, but you might say, but my children, they don't choose anything. They don't use the materials on the shelf. They might just be observing and watching and waiting. They may be just pacing around and around. They're not engaged. I want to engage them and I don't know exactly how to do that. Well, a reminder that there's so much that happens. There's no worries. There's so much that happens from the act of observing. So you see this child observing a child doing her work on the shelf. There's interest, there's engagement. I bet the teacher has given the recommendation that your hands are behind your back when you observe somebody doing their work. And so her hands are behind her back. Because boy, don't you want to put your hands on it? Maybe she does. So giving my hands something to do, like holding my hands behind my back or my hands in my pocket, right? So don't worry if children aren't actively choosing and selecting materials, activities, or work in the classroom. There's a lot of benefit they can get from watching others before getting involved themselves, right? Oftentimes it's possible for them to acquire and to consolidate the concept by what's called third-party participation in this way. So it might be that a child, in observing someone do a skill, can, through observing it, acquire that information, acquire and consolidate that learning concept just by the act of observing. Okay, so let's pause and write just a moment, right? So I'd like for you to think about, what we've just talked about in the last little bit, especially what about the not choosing work, right? So often as teachers, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves so that all children are working all day long, right? What about what is the benefit of the observing and of walking around? Is it the child trying to regulate? Maybe we take a look at our environment. Is it too much that's happening? Maybe the music's too loud. Maybe we turn off the music or dim the lights or brighten the lights, right? So we could take a look at that behavior when they're not engaged. Is there benefit there, or is there something else I could do? Right? So pause and write. And when you're ready to come back, come on back. Okay, now we're shifting gears a little bit. We want to get to the reason behind the behavior, because aren't we all investigators? We want to know why. Why is this happening, right? So here's what we talk about. Well, you'll see on this slide some ideas for a few more visual aids. And this is, I want to give credit where credit is due. This was created by All Hands on Language, a person who has an Etsy account. And don't we all love a little Etsy? So you can make these yourself, or you could support an artist, a local artist, or an independent artist and teacher, and buy it already made. So All Hands on Language by Etsy. Okay. If you think about what's called antecedent strategies are those prompts and the tools that we provide to the child to help them avoid using inappropriate behaviors as a form of communication. Okay, so we can use these kinds of materials to help children know what to say and what to do instead of what not to do, right? So let's give them a prompt. Let's give them some tools so they will know what they can say. What do you say when you sit across from a friend and they're eating and you can see them chewing, you see the food in their mouth? What do you say? What do you not say? Right? You can show and role model and practice how to do those things, right? Use the prompts, use the tools. And sometimes the prompts and the tools might be you. Another something you may experience when you have students who are on the spectrum in your classroom is a real difficulty with change, right? Change, no, I don't want that to happen. Wait, you're not my teacher. Wait, you're not supposed to be the one picking me up. So there's like, wait, hold up, huh? So when are your children likely to be disoriented or distracted or may wander off? Right? What events require those impromptu responses from children, right? Throughout the day, are there opportunities? Yes. And circumstances? Yes. Where children have to, okay, what do I do? Right? And some children, particularly children who are on the spectrum, have more difficulty with impromptu responses, right? So there may be more coaching that's necessary during those times. Right? You probably have unexpected fire drills in your classroom, right? Doesn't that throw everybody for a loop, right? When you can practice those ahead of time, children know what to do when that big sound comes on. Even still, that big sound can really be disruptive to a child who, especially a child who has that sensory sensitivity of sound, right? Okay. So here's another example, right? So there may be an activity that involves a series of seemingly unconnected expected actions, right? Like I'm going to put on my hat, I'm going to put on my scarf, or I'm going to cut this banana and then I'm going to eat that banana with a knife and fork, right? Those kinds of series of unconnected expected actions may not be clear, right? It could be totally outside the scope of understanding for an autistic child. Like what might be what they may be thinking, right? They might become distressed, right? At unexplained rush of activity, right? When there's something that's happening that's really different, like, oh, we have to get up and go right away, or, oh, everybody come here. That might be distressing when there's a burst of rush, right? When the expected pace is disrupted or shifted or changed, when the people are changed, like, wait, where's my teacher? You're not my teacher. You're not the person who helps in the bathroom. You're not the person who brings us snack. That can be distressing, right? Because it's change. Okay. So what do we observe? We're shifting again here. I'm going to have a little bit of water. So we talked earlier about our superpower and our skills of observation. That's an incredible gift to tap into all the time, but especially with children who are on the spectrum. So let's check it out. What is it that we see? What do we observe, right? And then we can consider, let me take a look at my environment. Is there something that I could shift and adjust so that the child can be more successful? What are your adaptations do you have available, right? So you're going to first take a look at your environment and then consider, are there adaptations that can assist with the child in their struggle that we see through our observation, right? So we're going to consider adaptations, adaptations, adaptations. This is a bridge between what their skill is now and what their skill can be. So it's like the bridge from here to there as they grow, right? So what is it that you observe in your classroom around lighting? What kind of lighting do you have in your environment? Oftentimes, in conversations that I've had with autistic individuals, there's a noticing of the buzz of fluorescent lights. They notice when a light bulb is about to go out, you know, that flicker. I can't not notice that, right? That's what I've heard. That buzz is so loud, I can't believe nobody else hears that, right? So consider the lighting in your classroom. Consider the sound. What sounds are happening that you can adjust, right? It will happen that there may be construction outside of your classroom and it's loud and it's noisy. And sometimes during certain parts of the day, the sound is going to be louder, right? What about textures, right? The materials on the shelf. Do you have a variety of textures for children to be drawn to, right? And to choose. This feels good. I want to do this. I want to hold this. I want to work with this. Or this feels ick. No thanks. No way. And they won't want to put their hands on it. So when we've taken a look at that, let's consider as much natural light as possible. Hooray. That's great. What about headphones? Noise canceling headphones, right? Some children have their own pair that they keep in their cubby, and some classrooms have a few pair that are available for children to choose from. You decide that depending on your policies for that at your school or in your program, right? Where do you want to share them, or is it individual, right? Okay, so that's another adaptation, right? Consider, this material is made of wood or glass or silk. And sometimes children will want to put their hands on that, and then some children will not. So it depends. So through your observation, notice if children steer away from that kind of texture or that feel, or are they drawn to something else, right? So it depends on the individual child. Okay, again, we're still observing. So we want to consider, what is this child's special interest? So way early on, we were talking about the pie chart, and we talked about fixations, right? And fixations can be something that they're very interested in. Like they may know everything there is to know about clocks, or everything there is to know about dinosaurs, or everything there is to know about trucks, or everything there is to know about you name it, right? So what are their special interests? So say it is dinosaurs, right? A lot of children love dinosaurs. It might be a particular dinosaur or a particular shark, right? I'm remembering a child who knew so much about, what was the name of that shark? It was a shark that I can't remember, but it was a particular shark that he was super interested in and fixated and wanted to know everything there is about it. In fact, he already knew, so he was there to tell you all about the shark, right? You know how hard it was to find books about that specific shark? It was a struggle. Find your favorite children's librarian at your local library, and they can help you find those books. Okay, so once you know what their special interest is, consider, I can weave that into my classroom environment, and I can find books about it. I can start conversation about it. I could invite them to tell a friend about that shark, or about that particular dinosaur, or about how a clock works. They can create a book about it, their own book. You can create language cards, right? you can make an adaptation to materials that you already have in your classroom and give them a flavor of what is their special interest. So that can be a possible successful way to get their hands on the materials, right? If they dig insects and you would really love for them to to practice with the language cards or with this particular kind of puzzle, you're working on fine motor or you're working on this or that, let's find one with an insect on it. Or I'm going to buy a packet of stickers with insects and maybe that insect sticker is on that material that will draw them to that, right? It's a way to think creatively. So what is their interest and how can you weave it in all sorts of areas in the classroom experience? So that's the pause and the question to write about right now. So what are the special interests? How can you weave that into your day-to-day? What about your environment, the lighting, the sound, the textures, right? You might end up with a big to-do list after this. But don't forget to write down what you're already doing, right? Okay, so we're taking a look at our environment. We're taking a look at what adaptations we can make. What about lighting, sound, texture, and special interest? How can you weave it in? How do you already weave it in? So I'll be quiet. Find your pause button, hit pause, write all that, come up with a plan. What do you plan to do? What do you already do? And what do you plan to do to make those adaptations in your environment? And when you're ready and you're finished, just come on back. I'll be here. Okay, we're back. Okay, Amy, that's great. We've talked about the children, we've talked about the environment, but how am I going to prepare myself? Because the work can be hard, can be tiring, can be even exhausting. So what about me? What can I do to prepare myself? Okay, so you might say to yourself, or you may have heard a colleague say, I don't know how to work with these kids. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I already have so many challenges in my classroom. I can't take one more. There's so much to do and so many things to worry about. I don't know what to do. You might hear yourself saying that or hear a colleague say that. So, deep breath. Start with what you know. Start with what you know works. Who are your people that you could reach out to learn more, to have a fresh perspective, right? You might hear some of these things. One, you could start with helping that child with socializing, using the grace and courtesy idea, using the powerful tool of a social story, right? Pointing out as you role model, right? Coaching, describing and coaching, right? Offer clear and consistent guidelines using that concrete language, right? Deep breath. Next, another reminder is frequent positive reminders supported by visual and written information, right? I'm thinking of a child in a classroom who was autistic, and what worked so well with this particular child was a tap on his table. So not too much that we broke his conversation, but as he was focused and as he was working on something that we really wanted to work on, and he was really engaged and invested and his interest was piqued, all of that, we would tap on his table just like as we walked by, and that was a positive reminder, like, keep going, I see you, I see that, right? So that is just one example. That might work, might not work for your children, right? This also, this bit here, the frequent positive reminders supported by visual written information, is important to remember as you're communicating with the families, right? What are you sharing? How often are you calling or communicating or texting or emailing or meeting in person? When you do that, is it only about what's not working, or are you also meeting to say, hey, here's where we're growing, here's what's working, this is going really well. What are you doing at home? Here's what we're doing in classroom. Let's collaborate, let's partner, right? So notice how often and when do you reach out to the family or the important person in the life of the child that's outside of the classroom? Do you offer positive reminders? And do you follow it up with something that's written, right? Speaking of written, I recommend write everything down. Just document, document, document for loads of reasons. One, so that you can notice patterns. Two, so you can notice what works and what doesn't work. You can realize, well, I tried this about a month ago and it kind of worked, but I tried something else and it worked better. And then you might want to revisit that first one and adjust it, right? So when it's written down, you don't have to hold all of it in your brain, especially if you have several children or many children in your classroom that you're trying to figure out how to develop an individual plan for every single child, right? So write down those timetables, write down the instructions and those messages for yourself and for the family, right? Okay, deep breath. Okay. And as you're communicating with the child, here's another important reminder. Simple instructions spoken slowly. Please put the toys in the box versus please tidy up, right? Be clear and simple and direct with what it is that you expect, right? This is also something that can help you to regulate, to get clear of what is my expectation. Toys go in the box, blocks go in the basket versus, okay, everybody, clean up. And you start singing a cleanup song. Some children will not know what that means every time, right? Next, remember those small work groups, solid role models, special small communication group activities. So it may be that you invite the child who's on the spectrum to join with another child or another child who can, if you're doing role play, who can role model, and let's practice asking a friend to play. Let's practice turning towards someone when we speak to them. Let's practice unpacking our food onto the plate, right? Those kinds of social skills are something that we could do in small work groups with solid role models and provide that focused small communication group activities. Okay, deep breath. Another thing to remember, what about the playground? We've talked a lot about classroom. So during outdoor time, what is the meaning of the playground language and the expectations, right? We might find that we use idiomatic expressions, and often those are lost on children who are really seeking that concrete, literal, what did you say? This is what you said, right? They're seeking that. So we may want to be really aware of how we're phrasing what we're trying to say to children, right? I know that's something I tend to speak in metaphor a lot, so I have to be really mindful to not do that and say what it is and what is true. It's really helpful. Another thing to remember is to respond to the child's intentions and not to what is actually said. And that can be for all children. But when we can be observant and imagine what is that child's intention, is they're trying to sit with somebody for a snack, right? For example, and what's their intention? How can it, do we notice that there's a skill that's lagging right there? Can we coach into that? Right? Because we know and we understand what is their intention, right? They've been practicing making bids for social connection, and it can be really awkward sometimes. Can we step in, allow some struggle, or when is that prime moment to step in to coach? Maybe it's in the moment, maybe it's separate, maybe it's at a different time, right? But respond to their intentions and not to what is actually said. Okay, deep breath. Consistently give permission, give some room to let them watch other children first. See what the lay of the land is, and then have a turn. Double check that the child understands what's expected of them. Deep breath. Now, this is one for all children, but it's the power of connection. Connect with them in their preferred manner at times that are neutral. A lot. Now, I want to underline in their preferred manner, right? You will learn that in time with your child if you have a student on the spectrum. It's great to ask the other important adults in the life of the child, what is their preferred manner of connection? It probably will be different than what you might expect, right? So a hug or a high five might not be their preferred manner of connection, right? That tap on the table that I mentioned was this particular child's preferred method, right? Was not interested in touch or was not interested in eye contact and smile. That was not their preferred manner of connection, but a tap on their table was connection. He would do that back to us. So it would come to us if we were sitting in the observer's chair or over here, the children were doing their thing. He would come to the table beside us and just tap. And I believe that was his way of reconnecting to us as well. We took it. So imagine and figure out what might there be their preferred manner of connection. And then do that at times that are neutral. Not when they're focused up, but when they're moving from one thing to another, or they're coming close. What is their manner of connection? And then connecting with them in that way. Okay, another time to pause and write. What's on your mind right now? What ahas have you been thinking about over these last few minutes? So I'll be quiet myself. Find the pause button, and after you finish writing, come on back. Okay, now we're back. Another reminder to take a deep breath. There's lots of information, I know. And this one is for you, especially. And it's about asking for help when all of your regulation tools are kaput, are spent. You find yourself becoming dysregulated. It's been a long day. It may feel like you're constantly using adaptations or creating adaptations, adjusting the environment, adjusting yourself, right? And you could find yourself dysregulated. So when you find that all of those self-regulation tools are spent, are gone, who are your people? Who are your partners? Who are your colleagues that one can notice, because they probably can notice before you notice sometimes that, oh, Amy, I can cover for you. It's time for you to take a break. Or I'm going to fill up my water bottle. May I fill yours up too? Who are your partners? Who are your people that can notice when you are becoming dysregulated and could, in a way that is okay for you, let you know that it's time to regulate. Amy, you're doing that thing with your face again. Pause. Drop your facial muscles. Okay, great. Helpful. Thank you. Right. So who are your people? And do they know what support looks like for you? Okay. Last thing I want to say about your people, don't forget to thank them. That's all I want to say about that. Okay, now, what is one thing that you plan to do in the coming weeks? What is your big takeaway from today? What's one aha moment, or what's one, oh, I hadn't thought about that, or I forgot about that, I'm going to do that thing? Or was there something that you're like, "Oh, I don't know about that. I got to think about that some more." What's your plan? What's your big takeaway, and what's your plan that you want to put into action right away in the coming weeks? So hit the pause button, write that down. What's your plan? What are you going to do? When are you going to do it? Who are you going to tell about it? And what's a takeaway from today? Okay, now we're back. If you have final thoughts, or if you have something that you would like to add to this, or feedback for this webinar, please feel free to reach out to me, to share your thoughts, what worked, what I could do differently next time. What information would you like to see added to a follow-up to this? Because there'll be another in a series like this. So I would love very much and appreciate very much to hear from you and to hear your thoughts as you're doing this work going forward. So please feel free to reach out to me. Also, feel free to check out my Socimo books. So I talked to you about the Socimo books I wrote. So here's the one, Hey Friend, Wanna Play? Then there's one about consent. What's that anyway? The next one is, wow, that was a big emotion. And that's concrete ways to manage and kind of navigate when those big emotions wash over you. It's a children's book to be read with an adult alongside a child, and then the child reads on their own. The next one is Rude, Mean, Bully. What is that? And we talk about the role of the upstander. The upstander is really the star of this book, right? So that's that one. And then lastly, The Spark, which is a guided journal that I created for teachers. In that class, in that book are prompts to write, places to draw and to paint, tools to use for yourself, for the children in your classroom, for your relationship with your colleagues. And then there's a section for families, right? Oh, I'm getting ready to have a really hard conversation. What do I need to do? So it has tools in there for you. Now, and the last section is my future. What do I plan to do? How do I want to grow? Where do I plan to be? So that is available. You can get your copy at Amy Williams Academy. I would be honored if you had them in your classroom. So thank you so much for joining me. You did it. Here's the ways to find and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Amy Williams. There's my email, amywilliamsacademy@gmail.com. Can't wait to hear what you think and what you plan to do. And then there's my website, amywilliamsacademy.com. So there we go. This concludes our webinar. I hope you have an amazing afternoon or evening or day, and feel free to reach out if there's anything I could do to help support your work. All right, until next time.